The time surely passes when there are quality performances. We're already halfway through part 1. Before we begin with the next performers, we have one more guest speaker in the first part of our event, who is here to share her words regarding her experiences.
Everyone, please welcome them with a round of applause.
Okay, can I give you this? Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me today. My name is Marie Pham. I was born Phương Anh Pham. I am of Vietnamese background. I was born in Vietnam, and at the age of 3, my family moved to France. I lived there for 12 years, and then at the age of 15, I came to Canada. So I think of Canada as my third country, on my third continent, and English is my third language. And I say that because I think that many of you, also Canada is maybe not your first country, and English is maybe not your first language. We are all here to make Canada what it is today, a beautiful multicultural mosaic filled with so many different cultures, so many different experiences and circumstances. And it's a country that, many of us chose, or our parents chose for us to come here. And many of you, the young people, were born here as well. And we have this common, collective vision, but also responsibility to make Canada what we want it to be. In my daytime job, I am the CEO of the Canadian Centre for Diversity and Inclusion. And it is a national charity that was formed about 11 years ago with the vision of building a more inclusive Canada. A more inclusive Canada for all of us, regardless of your background, whether you are young, middle-aged, or an elder. Despite and because of all of the different cultures and languages that you bring to Canada. And so, as I was thinking about today's presentation, I wanted to maybe talk a little bit about our national identity, because we're so different, each and every one of us, and what it means for us, with all of our differences, to be Canadian. And so, for me, if I can share a little bit about my journey, it may be the journey of many of you as well. Different stories, but common themes. And in our attempt to build a sense of identity and a pride of being Canadian, what does that look like for us? And so, over the course of my early life, whether I was, one of the very few Vietnamese kids in France where we lived, or when I came here at 15, I often struggled with the feeling that I did not always belong, that I always had a foot in and a foot out. And I think many of you probably can relate to that. And Young In talked about that a little bit earlier, as well as the deputy mayor. And so, if I, who was able to learn English for 4 years before coming to Canada, if I, who was living in France for 12 years in the Western world, came here and I still have challenges, where the teachers put me in the wrong classes at the lower level, where they put me into ESL lessons without assessing my English skills, and where it was very hard to break through that invisible wall of people seeing you and not thinking that you're Canadian. It was hard. It was hard. And it was the immigrant kids, actually, who were the ones who welcomed me. And it was strange because I didn't understand that. I grew up in France where, even though I was one of the only Vietnamese kids, I was accepted and welcomed by everyone. And yet here, when I came to Canada as a 15-year-old, somehow it was very difficult to fit in. And so that led me on the path to learning more about society and culture and inclusion. And I did undergrad degrees in sociology as a result of that. And trying to gain that deeper understanding of the value of community. What's going on? What are some of the issues that communities face? And how can I use my connection and my energy to mobilize people to create opportunities and programs that can support social inclusion civic participation, and address racism. And maybe many of you are here today because you know you're performing, but many of you are also here today because you want to support this cause of multiculturalism and anti-racism. And as I was trying to figure out how to build community as a way to give back, what I did not realize at the time over the years is that by giving back, I was also myself building my own sense of identity and shared identity with the rest of Canada. It was actually beneficial not just for me, but for both sides, for everyone. It was unifying, reinforcing, and compelling. And when you're all here today, celebrating multiculturalism and addressing racism and discrimination, you are part of that journey, that story of Canada as we're trying to build a nation and create a more inclusive Canada for all. As we do this work, we have to really understand what defines Canada, and I would be amiss not to mention that first and foremost, we have to get a much, much better understanding and appreciation of the history of the first peoples of this land, the Indigenous peoples, and the fact that Canada was built on Turtle Island, and that on this Canada Day, we need to recognize that, and that as we celebrate the coming of Canada, we also have to understand the history of colonization and oppression that the first peoples of Canada, the Métis and the Inuit, faced. That is part of our learning journey if we want to build a more inclusive Canada. And beyond the flags and snow and hockey and maple leaves and a beautiful Canadian anthem and all of the things that we're so proud to be Canadians of, our beautiful laws of rights and freedoms, about bilingualism, employment equity, and multiculturalism, we need to also find ways, practical ways, of how we can relate to one another and work together. Because underneath that surface level of Canadian identity, we have to figure out what is fundamentally important for us. And as we think about that, also think about the research that a couple of years ago, nearly 8 in 10 Canadians said they were proud of the country's history and diversity. But at the same time, there were people who answered the survey and said, but they were ashamed of the treatment of Indigenous peoples and residential schools, that they were ashamed of the treatment of Japanese Canadians during World War II, when thousands of them were removed from their homes and put in internment camps in Canada, while Canada was fighting against the Japanese. That they were ashamed of the Chinese head tax and anti-Black racism. And in 2021, at the height of COVID, where some folks were blaming Asians for the, coronavirus, more than half of Asian Canadians experienced discrimination that year. More than half. So this is not just the history. This can happen at any time. Any movement in our society can create racism and discrimination again. And as Young In says, sometimes it's not just overt racism, but it's the little microaggressions that some of us may experience. And so what can we do about that? Maybe I can share with you just 2 principles to take away. One is thinking and believing that diversity is a strength and not a liability or a deficit. And as you're thinking about this, ask yourself, what is your attitude towards diversity? Do you see different sounding names? Someone with a different accent? Someone who looks different from you? Someone who dresses differently from you as beautiful? When you see that difference, are you naturally curious to learn more about that person? Do you want to connect with this person because you know they bring with them a whole set of different experiences that you don't have, and that it could open a Pandora box of all new experiences and opportunities? Or do you see that person as, are they going to fit in? As someone less than? As someone who doesn't really have what it takes? As a second-class citizen, perhaps? And the second thing that I want to ask you to think about is, as you're building your own journey and your own legacy of who you want to be, not today, but when you grow up, or even as a contributing member of our society, what can you do to build a sense of legacy and agency for yourself? Your self-determination, understanding your own story and your own authenticity, and being proud of that, even though it's not perfect. You may have made some mistakes in the past, and it's okay, but it's who you are. And then taking that sense of determination and agency and creating the life that you want, not just for yourself, but for others. To remove barriers to inclusion, to look at policies and practices in your schools, in your workplace, in the healthcare system, in the community, where you work, in everyday behaviors. What are some of the things that I can do differently? How can I show up for others in ways of true allyship to support one another as we build inclusion? And I just want to wrap up with this quote that I really, really like. And it's from Alexander Dan Hager, who once wrote, "When a flower doesn't bloom, you fix the environment in which it grows, not the flower." There's no one here that needs to be fixed, but it is the environment that we need to look at. It is maybe pouring a little bit more water. It is enriching the soil. It is making sure that the sun is shining on the flower. For you and I to set the beautiful conditions that we need to create an environment where each and every one of us can bloom and thrive in Canadian society. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the afternoon.
Thank you so much for this inspiring speech, Ms. Marie Pham. I admire your perseverance and all the efforts that you've put into advocating for your vision of unity, which goes perfectly with the theme of our event today.
Thank you for sharing your opinion, Noah. And thank you, Marie Pham, once more for your speech.